Kirsten Oswald is the deputy leader for the SNP in Westminster. My question is a simple one. Is this Brexit deal bad news for Nicola Sturgeon? Kirsten, welcome to the show.
Hello there.
Wonderful to have you on the programme. Ultimately, the SNP might have had an argument that a no-deal Brexit would damage the interests of the Scottish people. Now that we have a deal, zero tariffs, zero quotas, nothing to see here.
No, I don't think that's the case, unfortunately. I think it's a terribly difficult situation for people in Scotland, but for people across the UK as well. I heard you saying in your introduction, is this a bad situation for Nicola Sturgeon? It's a bad situation for everyone in Scotland and across the United Kingdom. This is not a good deal. This is not in any way comparable to the deal that we had as members of the European Union. In every single way, it leaves us worse off.
You know what? You're so right. It is very different. We don't have to send millions of pounds across to Brussels every week.
I think that we all come off significantly worse off with the deal that is there on the table. It's a really difficult and disappointing situation that we're in. This hard Tory Brexit, this isn't what people who voted to leave signed up for. And it certainly isn't what people in Scotland voted for. In Scotland, people overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU. Where I live in East Renfrewshire, 3/4 of people voted to remain in the EU. I think they'd be astonished if I suddenly did an about turn and supported this shoddy deal that's going to make them all so much more badly off. It's a sad day. And really, I think that the Westminster parties would do well to reflect on that. It's perplexing to me that the Labour Party are going to march through the lobbies on the coattails of the Tories to make this happen. This is not something that any of us should be celebrating.
I don't picture the good people of Scotland crying into their soup over the fact that they now once again have control of their borders. They don't have the finger-wagging European courts dictating their daily lives, and that they live in a country that can strike very lucrative trade deals with other economies, in particular, economies like the United States of America, which is not going to happen in a month of Sundays in the EU.
Again, I don't think that reflects the reality at all. And I don't think that reflects the thinking of the people in Scotland. People here are deeply sorrowful about the fact that we are going to be separated in this way from our European partners. This is not where we want to be in Scotland. Scotland sees itself as a proudly European nation, and it's very clear that what we now have a choice of is this shabby race to the bottom deal that is going to bring this hard Tory Brexit into really stark reality for people, or the alternative, which is to be an independent country at the heart of Europe. And I think that it's clearer and clearer every day. We've seen 17 consecutive polls in Scotland, which have shown that people in Scotland favour that option significantly over and above the option which we now see the UK government bringing forward.
Kirsten, it's very clear that there are people that love Europe but don't love the EU, which is a perfectly reasonable sentiment. I'm sure you'll agree. And similarly, it's possible to love Scotland but not love independence. In terms of the argument for independence, it's essentially to leave a union which is a close-by union where power is close by and, of course, shared and devolved, and which is highly collaborative and has been since the Act of Union. To sign up for
Brexit process, I must tell you.
Go on. Well, look, to sign up, essentially, Kirsten, what's happening with the SNP is to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. If you're going to play the kind of, power being far away argument and self-determination, you're leaving a union which is close by, which is collaborative in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and signing up for a much bigger union where the power is across the channel in Brussels.
That's just simply not the case, though.
Yeah, that's how the European Union works.
If I can go back to your repeated suggestion that there is somehow a collaborative arrangement in place, I'm afraid that's not true. So the very obvious way that we can show that to be the case is by looking at how the Westminster Parliament has dealt with Brexit. The Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government have been ignored at every single turn. They have spent years trying to engage with the UK government about this, and have been roundly dismissed. So
because the SNP wanted to stop Brexit and the whole of the United Kingdom voted to leave.
Sorry, that's just simply not what has happened. The SNP government put forward compromise proposals after compromise proposals, which were roundly ignored. This is not a union of equals. We were told in 2014 that if we remained within the UK, then we could lead. Lead, don't leave, is what they said. This is not what's happened. Scotland's voice has not been heard in this process. Scotland is being forced out of the EU against our will. And of course, if you think about the EU, it is a collection of independent member states. I think it would be incredible to suggest that France or Germany are not independent
states. Well, I think the French, the Italians, the Southern Europeans don't feel very independent.
Are able to make their own decisions as an independent country. And I think that these decisions would certainly be ones that would be better fitted to the needs and wishes of the people in Scotland.
A lot of people, Kirsten, will be spitting their cornflakes out at the idea that if you're in the EU, you're an independent country, but I'll let that go. I love Scotland passionately. It is one of the finest nations on God's earth, not just the landscape, but the cities, the industry, the creativity, but most importantly, the people, yourself included, I'm delighted to say. And I accept the emotional argument for independence. However, there's obviously no economic argument.
Well, again, I don't agree with that at all. So the notion in 2014 that people had the opportunity to vote for the status quo and that there was a degree of certainty in that, a degree of economic certainty perhaps, has certainly long since departed. So if we look at the way that the UK government are progressing things with Brexit, this race to the bottom, this is not something that Scotland should be part of. It's not something that we want to be part of. We have the opportunity.
You don't want a trade deal with America? You don't want to sell all that amazing Scottish produce to the Californians?
We want to sell Scottish produce wherever in the world we can, but of course the other side of that coin is that we want to make sure that the economic decisions that we're making here in Scotland are the ones that are right for people who live in Scotland. And at present, that's simply not the case. As we've seen through the COVID pandemic, we have not been able to do what we would want to do to make sure that we support people and communities in Scotland, because we have had to be on the coattails of the Westminster Parliament, because we simply do not have these powers at Holyrood. I think it showed very clearly why we have the need to have these powers here in Scotland for ourselves, so that we can make the economic choices and the social choices that are right for the people who live here.
Kirsten, final thought. Deeply grateful for your time. In relation to the coronavirus pandemic, no country has covered themselves in glory. The cases and the sad death toll in Scotland has been on a par with the rest of the UK. Every death is one too many. Clearly, support has been rolled out for so many industries, particularly the furlough scheme. Can I ask you whether the borrowing power of an independent Scotland could match that of the UK?
Well, of course, all of the countries in the world who are putting in provisions such as the furlough scheme are borrowing to make that happen. And as you've indicated, Scotland is not permitted to borrow at the moment. This is not something
Thank God.
Within the powers that we have. Well, I firmly disagree with that. I can't imagine why.
Not because the Scots don't have a right to it, but I'm really worried about giving Nicola Sturgeon, ultra-socialist, a blank cheque.
I don't recognise any of these descriptions, but I don't think it's a sensible proposition or one that stands up to any scrutiny to suggest that Scotland and the people in Scotland are any less capable of making sensible economic decisions than people elsewhere or even people in the rest of the UK. It would be far better for people in Scotland to have the ability to make the choices that are right for people here, rather than, as we saw recently, when we had to wait for some areas of England to require furlough before that was able to be rolled out here. That was plainly ludicrous. It wasn't a sensible or sustainable way to behave. And the decisions that we would want to make here are the ones that we should have the power to make.
And that is dead right. And that's a disgrace that there isn't autonomy in that sense. And in fact, Kirsten, I'm all for more devolution. Sir Keir Starmer is trying to agree a new deal with the Scottish people about more devolution. And I certainly think the Scottish people and the nation of Scotland should have potentially, tax raising and borrowing powers. My concern is that the buying power of the UK as a brand on the international bond markets is surely more solid than that of a smaller independent country. I'm not trying to belittle Scotland. If England was alone, if Wales were alone, if Northern Ireland were alone, they would also have a lower credit rating. The bottom line is that the UK is a very sound investment at a time of national crisis like this. A smaller independent nation like Scotland just wouldn't be. You just wouldn't get that cheap credit.
I just don't see why Scotland would be different to any of the other small independent nations who've been able to deal well and in the way that suits their countries best with the COVID pandemic. I think that it's demonstrated very clearly, actually, that small independent countries are able to take the decisions and make the policies that are best for the people who live there. Scotland will not be any different to that. And it's really up to the people in Scotland, not up to people at Westminster and not up to Sir Keir Starmer, who only has one MP in Scotland, to decide what the future of Scotland should be. It's up to the people here, not anyone else.
Scotland may be a small country, but it is a truly great country. And Kirsten, we're deeply grateful that you've joined us on Talk Radio. I hope we get to speak again soon. Kirsten Oswald is the SNP's Deputy Leader in Westminster. Fascinating stuff.